Hello, work life warriors. I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to stop past today and talk about the book I just finished. First, I want to start with a story. I don't know if you're familiar with storage wars, but I have a friend who actually participate in buying auction storage units. Anyway, he bought this unit and it looked promising. And he went inside and he searched through everything, and there were a couple of valuable things. But one of the things I found interesting was that there weren't any books in there except for one. And it made me think, like, out of all of the valuable things in here, non-valuable things, you're obviously not an avid reader. Why did you keep this particular book? So instead of allowing him to throw it away, he gave it to me and I read it. And even though it is a book that was, I think, written in 1991, so over 30 years old, it is still very much relevant to today. And so I just kind of wanted to come past and talk a little bit about the gems that I've learned from reading this book. And the book is called The Mismeasurement of a Woman. And it was published in what year? 1992, so literally 30 years ago. I find it so strange and odd that a lot of the things that she talked about in this book we're still very much going through today, and the research hasn't really moved us along in any way, shape, or form. We're still dealing with a lot of the same issues in society, health issues, just image issues in general. And so I just found it very odd. 30 years later, the needle hasn't moved, not a lot. So normally I read books, and I don't know if you can see it, but I don't really get a lot of notes from the books that I read. I have a certain genre that I read, so it's just kind of reiterating a lot of information, and this doesn't fit. So I'm just going to go through some of the bookmarks that I have and just discuss the raw thoughts that I have that kind of triggered me to think about things in society and experiences that I've gone through. So, um, yeah. So the book is just basically talking about how society treats men differently from women as far as health, as far as social status, as far as what roles they have in society. And she talks a lot about the problems that occur to get us to where we are now, or just the thinking and the mindset that lead us to being relegated as second class citizens in the society. And so she talked a lot about the differences between men and women, if there are, or the perceived differences that society seems to think. It makes me think about like how we socialize or normalize or condition our children. We raise little girls differently from little boys, and it makes me wonder, if you raise both of them the same way, how would they become? Would toxic masculinity even exists? And so all of us, whether male and female, internalize patriarchy. And although we can see clear evidence of how women internalize patriarchy, we rarely stop to think how men internalize it, mostly because they are the perpetuators of a lot of the issues that we have going on. So we seem to think that the victim is the only source that we should consider, but we never stop to think of what makes the so-called villain a villain. So if men are perceived as the villain, what happened to them that made them into the villain? Men are birthed into this world, they're raised by parents, and the question is, what happens that turns a kid from a sweet little boy who loves his mom, who loves his sister, who wants to protect them, to toxic masculinity, basically. So this book kind of just went over the mental part of it, the physical part of it, the emotional part of it, the societal part of it. And I thought a lot of things were still relevant to today. So one of the things I thought was interesting in this book was the self-defeating personality disorder. It says the healthy standard for both men and women, putting other people's first, behaving modestly, appraising the limitation in one's life, which sex now suffer from the pathology of deviance. So they talk about the defeating personality disorder. And when I think of this, I just think of like negative self-talk, where sometimes you may talk yourself out of trying new things or doing new things because you just don't think that you can, or that you can deal with the embarrassment if you don't do it well. And so just thought that was very interesting, um, that that disorder is normally tied to women in society because women aren't necessarily allowed to practice autonomy and figure out things in their own accord. We kind of have some unspoken rules to tell you how you're supposed to show up as a woman, what phases and milestones you're supposed to attain as you go through life. And so there are so many unspoken norms in society. And because we're not allowed to test and try and do new things like men or little boys are encouraged to kind of like explore and be adventurous and kind of do these things. We have roles from a very young age that a lot of times we just don't try things because it's outside of the roles or the standard of what a woman is supposed to be or how she's supposed to behave. So I thought that was very interesting, because she proposed, like, how come they don't have a misogynistic personality disorder, which is the opposite of that? If society produces women who have self-defeating personalities because we are the oppressed sex, or the sex that doesn't have the most power or control, what does having the power and control do to the opposite sex? And we never really talk about that. When you are the dominant of something and you continue to be the dominant of something, how does that affect your personality? How do you internalize the experiences that you have as the dominant person or the dominant sex in a society? We never stop to think that if men are the dominant sex in society, how being dominant influences their everyday life. Because if you are born into the world as a sweet little boy and the world does not respect sweet, kind men, then eventually you would have to change how you are to be accepted into society, to have a social circle, to advance in society. You would have to change. So if the narrative is that men are supposed to be aggressive and dominant and controlling, and you are opposite of that, and the world is ran by other men, how will you be perceived? Will you be able to accomplish the things that you would like to accomplish without showing up as the standard, which is toxic masculinity? So I thought that was very interesting, and just something to kind of think about, because women often have to think about how they show up in society as a means to survival. But when you are born the dominant sex, you don't think about the things that you're taught and how it affects you and how you internalize it and go out into society. So a lot of the times the definition of what manhood is or what men are was a definition that was given to you or passed down to you from the people in your life, from the society that you live in. And you never stop to think, what type of man do you want to be? What type of man do you want to work towards growing to be? How do you want to heal? How do you want to self-develop to grow into your definition of what a man is and not society's definition? So that was very important to me. Another one was, so kind of this idea, I always ask people, like, what happens, little boys are so sweet, they're so kind, they love their mom, and then suddenly they wake up, it's almost like it's overnight, and he is a completely different person, and the mom is like, I cannot get him to listen to me, he doesn't respect me, he's just changed, he's not the person that I used to know, like, what is happening? And I always try to figure out what exactly happened and when. When did that change take place? When did it go from sweet, kind little boy who wants to protect and cherish women to now I will exploit and manipulate and lie and cheat and steal to get whatever I want, including women? How do you go from loving women to treating them as a prize or a trophy? What happens and when does it happen? And so in the book, she talks about the gender segregation. And she said it's essentially unrelated to the individual attributes of children who make up all girls and all boy groups. Instead, it is related to the fact that between the ages of 3.5 and 5.5, boys stop responding to girls' requests, suggestions, and other attempts to influence them. That was very interesting to me because 5.5 is actually really young. I did not think it was nowhere near that age, and it's problematic because most teachers are women, and men go through 18 plus years of learning from the people in their lives. Most of the people are women. The first person who teaches you anything is your mom most of the time, and then you have your dad and all of the aunties and uncles in your family and just your family in general. And then you move into school around 4 or 5, and most of the teachers there are women. It's rare to have like many male teachers in the school. There's some, but there's not enough to make a substantial difference. So if men stop listening, or boys stop listening to girls and or women at 3.5 to 5.5, that means that the only reason why they're listening to the adult teachers who are women is because of the authority or control issue. They don't necessarily respect them, but they don't want to get in trouble. And that kind of creates an imbalance because control without respect is exploitation. Even if it's for their best, it's still not their choice. And it's just so interesting to know that at such a young age, little boys begin to disregard women. And I wonder why. I think it has more to do with societal factors than biological factors, because if you are looking around in the world as a little boy and you see how other men operate, and now that is at the point where you are starting to self-actualize, you're starting to break away from your parents' identity of you to become more independent, and you look around and you see men who look like you, or you're a boy and you know that you'll grow into a man, and you see men behave in a certain way, you begin to emulate how they behave, even if it's not healthy, even if it's toxic, even if it's not really beneficial to the society as a whole. So I just thought that was so interesting because a lot of women talk about in their relationship, the man just don't listen to them. He's not really here. And it's just so interesting to think that that started at 3.5 to 5.5. So it's like the first beginning courting stages of your relationship where you think a man is listening to you. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. It's kind of debatable at this point. But what we do know for sure is that he's listening to get something, back to the exploitation part of it. He's come because he's intrigued by you. He wants goodies, so he'll listen. And he don't only want your goodies, but he do want your goodies. And so he'll listen to get your goodies, not just listen because it's you, because he respects you, because he wants to get to know you. That's kind of heartbreaking to think about, and probably why we have so many like social concerns in our relationships, or so many concerns in our social relationships, because one sex just doesn't value the other. Very interesting. Okay, so another thing that I thought was funny, well, not really funny, but very interesting, was um, the book talks about the kind of silent accommodation goes on all the time, um, during gender. Like when we do gender, when people pick the gender roles or follow the gender roles that was set upon us, we do gender. It is something that we actually put on. It's like we act differently when we're around females or women as opposed to when we're around males or men. And so um, the book says we do gender unconsciously, adjusting our behaviors to our perception depending on the gender of the person we are working, playing, or chatting with. And I really find that inauthentic. I mean, I can see why it is done because you have to adapt, you have to be flexible, you have to survive. But also, it's kind of reinforcing superiority and inferiority when you treat different people, or different sexes different. So for me, I believe that I talk to the males and females the same, men and women the same. I do not feel like men are the better sex. I do not feel like women are the better sex. I do not think neither is. I think we're the same sex, just we're socialized or conditioned differently. Like I think women can be both masculine and feminine, and men as well. It's just that we're socialized that men should lean more towards masculinity and women should lean more towards femininity. But you cannot survive as a woman leaning fully in your femininity. Assertiveness is a masculine quality. So if you're going to live a quality life, you have to assert yourself. So there will be moments where you practice masculine qualities. A human being is both masculine and feminine. We are both, but society tell us to pick one or the other instead of and I believe it's important to try to integrate both femininity and masculinity in your life so that you can be efficient. So I just think that that's so easy, interesting that people change based on the sex that they're dealing with, which means that we never really know who people are. It's kind of inauthentic when people are interacting with each other because women say things and don't say things because of the company that they're in. When men don't necessarily do that, they speak their mind. They're taught that sharks and wolves are what society respects. So a man will speak up and say what he has to say for the most part, where women are conditioned to be quiet. I don't know how many times growing up I heard women are supposed to be seen, not heard. And I've never heard a man, be told that ever. So, very interesting. Another point talks about basically how what I was just saying, like women when they're in the company of men, they tend to change their language. They don't tend to be assertive in the way that they speak around other women, though they are assertive. They speak direct, but when they're around men, they add a lot of taglines and hesitance because they don't want to be perceived a certain way. And I just found that so interesting, especially it talks about with a man, he does respect a person who talks directly, but he doesn't, if it's a woman, he won't like her. But on the opposite, if she talks indirectly, then, and when she talks indirectly, he likes her, but doesn't respect her. So I found that very interesting. It's like if I'm assertive, then you respect me. You see me as an equal, but that means that I'm no longer sexually desirable. But if I relegate myself to inferior speech, then you don't respect me, but I'm desirable. As if both is an either or. Like, why can't it be both? But society makes it so both is not acceptable for a woman, um, and that how she speaks is to reassure the men around her. In the books, it says she must communicate that she has no wish to enhance her own status or challenge his. And it's like if you are around men or when communicating with men, you have to prove to them that you don't wish to enhance your own status. So basically, you have to dumb yourself down, um, or challenge his, because if he feels as though you're an equal, then you become a challenger and he treats you as such. It's no longer desirable. You kind of become one of the boys. But if you decide not to do that, then you're desirable and he wants to like you, own you, wife you. um that's just very absurd, but very interesting. And it kind of lets me know why, I get different reactions depending on who I'm around, because I choose to always communicate authentically, regardless of who I'm talking to. I do not let sex, race, status, any of those things affect how I talk to a person. I don't think it should for anyone, but I can understand in society, if you need to survive, you will pick up a lot of adaptive techniques to do so. So I do understand why, but I think that that's something that us women need to begin to change, or we should start changing, and we should not care if it is offensive to the opposite sex. We should not seek to reinsure them. That's not really our job. Um, they don't reinsure us. And so it's kind of your own job to kind of reinsure yourself, regardless of the sex. And so it's not our responsibility to reaffirm or reassure a man. Like, that is not our role here. Our role is to enjoy the life that you're living, be your best self, master yourself. And so if that means that being your best self, being an authentic self, um, is offensive to someone else, it's not your business. And I don't think that we should be playing ourselves down to be liked. How about choosing men who want a woman that will challenge them and help them expand and grow into their best self, so they can show up their best self in this world for their kids, for their loved ones, and make this experience count. Another point that I thought was interesting, talks about the tortured artist. And this was a really good one. And they talk about, like, as far as for the tortured artist, that is always a role of a man. And what makes him tortured is because he is not living up to the dominant roles in society that has been set for men. So for instance, if you're supposed to be, a man who provides for your family, but you choose to be an artist, then you're tortured because you can't necessarily provide for your family through art. And so, but again, the fact that you have a family is the motivation behind why your art is so, excellent. Whereas women are not necessarily given that choice. A woman can't, or she can, but she doesn't birth babies and go, oh, I'll spend time away from them. And that torture of being away from them is what will propel my work. So I thought that was very, very interesting, where it's like, it says in the book, the heroic female writer had books instead of babies, because otherwise the story went before the art went, both the art and the children would suffer. So I just think it's so interesting how a man's suffering can make him more productive in society, so he can walk away from his family, be tortured, suffer, and get fame and acclaim for the work that he's doing. But a woman cannot just walk away, abandon her family without someone bringing it up. And so it's like the woman has to choose between artwork and having a family, or has to take on the choice of being a tortured soul and all of the backlash that is going to come along with that, as opposed to a man that is never really an option. And the same thing with soldiers. It talked about how a lot of women go to war as well. And when interviewed, they always talk about, or they always mention, that she had to leave children home. But a large amount of male soldiers also are fathers, and that's never the narrative with the man. They never say he has to leave his family or his kids to go to war. But if a woman chooses to be in the military, they will say she left her family and her kids to go into the military, even if she doesn't necessarily have a family. It talks about that in the war, in one of the wars, 30,000, it says that 60%, it says, war is a male story per excellence. In the Persian Gulf War, which reflected a man-to-man battle between George Bush and Saddam Hussein, we were inundated with images of brave soldiers rescuing an innocent nation that has been raped by evil villains. Within of the 30,000 women, about 6% of the total troops who served in this war, in every way but combat. How can women do any rescuing of a damsel nation in distress? So it was just very interesting, because he talked about that majority of the men in that war had children, and they just never taglined them. But a lot of the women did not have children, but that was the tagline for the women in the war. So I just think that was very interesting, and kind of points out that war is just known as male, even though there are a lot of women who will participate in war, share the same ideals as the soldiers or the men or people who participate in war. So I found that interesting because, again, society tells a woman that that's just not her role, that's not who she is, that's not one of the roles that she should pick. But we have a large amount of women who do pick it, and their voices go unheard. So because, again, they're not the people who tell them their stories. So even though they're in the military, there's reporters that get to swing their story in whatever way that they see profitable. And I just thought that was very interesting. Women are not a monolith. Neither are men, even though society tries to condition us into these roles. Something else, it talks about incest. And it's talking about, again, this book was written 30 years ago, and it's talking about, like, the feminists started writing about incest and child molestation, that before then, child abuse, and before then it was just unfathomable. Like, people just did not believe that people were evil enough to commit these great crimes, that it was just not happening, and if it happened, it was rare. But what we know now, and I guess since the feminists begin to tell, ACEs tell us that a large subset of the population, if not more than half of the population, has had really traumatic events happen to them in their childhood. So it's now not unfathomable to believe in child abuse and incest and how these things affect women in their development in the world. So I thought that was very interesting because, again, it's hard for us to even really wrap our head around that there is great evil in this world. Not everybody has good intentions. Not everybody is loving and kind. Not everybody is just making mistakes. Some intentions are evil. Some people are not practicing love, and you could run into great evils in this world, and you can be in the middle of very hurtful things, and hurtful things can happen to you regardless of if you consider yourself a good or bad person. So just very, very interesting. So it talks about, like, again, the individual voice, how it's snuffed out over the group collective voice, and that even if individual people begin to make the changes in their life, if it's not enough, it's not sustainable. That at this point, a lot of the issues that women go through is a public health crisis. It's not just an individual health crisis. If you have over 50% of people with large ACEs scores who have been abused and traumatized, and they go out and birth children, then that means that this is it's a societal issue. Rape and incest and molestation can't just be in the hands of the individual, especially when there aren't any tools easily available. The access to resources are hard to come past depending on your class in the society. So it has to be a public health concern. Women's rights are human rights. And especially since women birth the babies, raise the babies, we have a large hand in how society grows or depletes. So I just thought that was very interesting. He says, or she says, nothing, we all need help and support, but here's a tricky feature. When you have systematic power abuse, the exclusive reliance on individualized solution diffuses the possibility of a strong collective voice and of action for change. Exclusively personal situations do nothing to defy the ongoing tacit permission for abuse. So it's like, if the society that we live in keep allowing for abuse, it will continue. If the society that we live in don't protect the women and children, it will continue. And when you say that it is in the hands of the women and children, which you swear to protect, but then relegate it to an individual issue instead of a public health issue, is an oxymoron and very confusing. And women are aware that you do not care. We see it in all of the decisions that are made for us that you don't even consult us about. So I just thought that was very interesting. Here is a little quote that I thought was interesting too. It says both men and women in short term has something to gain from things not changing, in the readdressing the balance of power or changing the rules of the game. But for both sexes, in the long run, clinging to old habits is dangerous, and in this world, deadly. I absolutely agree. I just watched a video before this video about a man who decided to talk about suicide, and he entitled the video "Toxic Masculinity, is killing us." And it's about, like, again, little boys are conditioned. When a little boy falls and he's hurting, the people around him say, "Suck it up, you're a man, don't cry, you don't have any feelings and emotions," and he internalizes that. So if having emotions and feelings is what make you alive and what makes you human, and you're taught from a young age that that's not your role, you're not allowed to feel anything, you're not allowed to have emotions, you're not allowed to cry, you eventually internalize that and stop feeling. You become numb. It's like the walking dead. Apathy is a real thing. Like, men are walking around feeling nothing on the inside because they stopped feeling a long time ago. It wasn't acceptable for them to feel. Only women and children are allowed to feel, which is the wrong sentiment. And that is leading to so many men committing suicide. In the video, he talked about how suicide is increasing, and is because of toxic masculinity. Men are not allowed to express themselves. They're not allowed to say that work is hard, that protecting the family is hard, that trying to grow and develop in the society is hard. They're not allowed to voice their concerns about things that challenge them, that make them sad, things that, you know, scare them. They're not allowed to have any fear, and that is just killing our society. You have a lot of broken homes, you have a lot of people committing suicide, you have a lot of health concerns, and then in general, people are just incivil. It's just so hard to be in the world because people are so unhappy, and misery loves company. So these toxic masculinity roles or patriarchy doesn't serve both men and women, and all it does is just pit us against each other in fighting while we're being exploited. So it's like, yes, it is both toxic to the men who receive that message and internalize it, and women who are on the oppressive side of that message and internalize it. So together, it's not men are better or women are better, but together we need to work together to redefine how we raise our children, how we raise our females and male kids, or women and male kids. We really need to sit down and talk about it, because we're both, human beings are born both female or male. The idea of womanhood or manhood, or women or men, is an idea constructed in society. So it's a societal construct, and it is dangerous to both sides of those sexes. It's easier for you to create your own construct that works for you, because there's no one size fit all. Maybe for you, you feel your best self when you are in control of your emotions, when you admit them, when you talk through them. But if society deemed that unacceptable, then you won't do it. So your idea of manhood or womanhood has to come from you. It can't come from the society that you live in, because it's a one size fit all, and it may not serve you. As a matter of fact, it may lead you to depression, suicide, health concerns, or alone. Because if a woman comes into the relationship looking for intimacy and you feel numb, then where does that leave the relationship? And if you really love her and unable to show her that you love her, then you end up alone. And from there, a lot of things obviously can happen, like more depression and suicide and drug and alcohol abuse and many things. So I just found that very interesting as well. Okay, so it talks about, like, I have this conversation all the time, like, who is more supreme in the jungle? Is it the lion or is it the gazelle? And in my opinion, it is the gazelle. The gazelle is the person who is constantly being tested, challenged, stressed, pulled, expanded to learn how to survive. It has a different mindset than a lion, who has no natural predators, that if something out of the blue was to happen to it, it would not know how to respond. As opposed to being a gazelle, something always out of the blue happens because you're prey. when you are the predator and the top predator, it makes you weak. And so this is like right here, she said, women who juggle are better off in many ways than those who don't. They are more tired. The story of Superwoman, however, draws the heat away from any institution that may be able to make it easier on the woman who has a family or job. It draws attention away from husbands and employers, the division of family or obligation, and the structure of corporation. It places the burden of adjustment on women, thereby eliminating the need to make adjustments elsewhere. So yes, I talk a lot about this. Like when we had the feminine movement, a lot of women were fighting for equal rights, but they should have been fighting for rights, different rights with additions. Because not only do you want to come into the workforce, but you want to be protected when you're taking care of the next generation alongside working in the workforce. It just reminds me of so many scenarios where women were in the workforce and maybe it snowed or the kids got out early because it was too hot or something happened, a kid got sick, and the mother had to figure out how to maneuver, how to pick up their children and still be available for work without getting points. I've seen so many single moms or mothers who are married wind up fired from their jobs and institutions because policies are not created when policies are not created when for the woman per se. It's not created for the woman who raised the next generation. It's like, okay, you can come into the workforce, but what you're trying to tell us is that you're doing 2 full-time jobs, and they don't make any adjustments. They are aware that parenting is full-time, and a lot of women are mothers, but they won't make any adjustments or give any resources to mothers so that they can do both. And so I really wish that we had fought for something that is more of aligns with what we need as opposed to what was already done. And so that's why I kind of, stay away from the feminist movement, because I don't want what men have. I want what we need. And I tend to lean more towards the womanist movement. And so this is more so just saying, like, yes, because you go out in the world and you do more, it makes you stronger. Men in general have been at the top of the food chain as far as sexes for a long time. And so again, as I talked about earlier in the video, we don't think about how being dominant is internalized, how it weakens you, how it makes you expect things that you didn't necessarily earn. And so that was just very important for me to even discuss here, because a lot of it is, we're taught that men are the stronger sex, just like we're taught the lion is the stronger of the predators. But I would have to disagree with that. I really do think that the gazelle is stronger through practice. Another point is, it talks about a couple and how they had to make some adjustments so that they're happy in their relationship. And in it talks about how the woman just had to change her mindset because the man was just unwilling to change his behavior. So either you can be upset about the behavior, or you can find a way where the behavior doesn't affect you. And that's what she was talking about. It says, a recent report survey found that next to money, the issue of how much my helpmate helps around the house is the single biggest source of resentment in many women's lives. The story that couples tell about their marriage may serve either to paper over the resentment or to make them move towards resolution that works. And so I just think about it in general, like if you already think you're killing it in the world and you're told that you're killing it in the world, and then you pair up with the oppressed sex, and because of the things they had to do in the world to survive, and they're looking at you like, but you're not killing it. And a lot of what you do actually cause my unhappiness. Like, what is the resolution for that? Because men seem to think they're killing it, which some are, But the majority of women seem to think that they're not. And we have a lot of human relation problems between male and female. And it makes me think that this is a part of the problem, because you've been told all of your life, you're so great, you're so great, you're so awesome. Everybody in this world needs you. We value you. We appreciate you. It kind of makes you weak. And a woman has always been told, you're property, you're not this, you're not strong, you're not, you can't do this, you can't think, that you're a vessel to have babies and raise babies. That's your lane. Stay in your lane. You're supposed to be pretty. You're supposed to be fun. That's your lane. Stay in your lane. And so when the two pair, it's not even. One has to work much harder in society just to survive and thrive, and the other one, things are just basically set up for him. Not that he doesn't have his own issues and concerns. I talked a lot about that in this video. Of course he has. He has many concerns and issues, since he's not even allowed to be authentically a human being. Men are not allowed to be human. They're supposed to be a robot without feelings and emotions. And so that was a very interesting point that it talks in the books. It also talks about intuition. It says that women have intuition because they're relegated to second-class citizens. It's not a superpower that women have to be intuitive. It's because we needed it in order to survive. That the reason why many men don't have intuition is because they don't need it. The world's kind of designed with them in mind, and they don't really need the intuitive message. The world tells them they're great, they rock it, they're awesome all the time. So to them, it's no second message. As a woman, someone could look at you and go, you're precious, but you know that there's a dual meaning behind that. And a lot of times you need your intuition to discern how people really feel about you. They'll smile in your face, which is the politically correct thing to do, but they have feelings underneath the surface that really show how they feel about women, or in general, men just kind of tolerate women because they haven't been taught to appreciate or value what a woman brings to any given situation. So I thought that this was such a good book. It was beautiful how she went through everything and kind of just like talked about a lot of the problems that were going on. She talked about depression and how depression shows up, and that a lot of times the depression has to do with, as a woman, how you're operating in life. It may be because, the relationships that you have are not satisfying, or how you're moving in society is not satisfying to you, and it creates a depression. And instead of people going to the source of why so many people are being depressed, and particularly why so many women are depressed, instead of trying to figure out the why, they just try to give you a solution. They give you antidepressants. They tell you the problem is you, suck it up, be a better wife, be a better mom, be a better person. And a lot of the problems, again, is a societal problem, that we need to fix the society that we live in, because it doesn't offer the same opportunities for everyone to grow, develop, and expand. So I really love this book. I think that everybody, even though it's 30 years old, is still relevant. It do have some points that become redundant and obsolete, but outside of that, it's a really good book. And I think that people should take the time, especially if you're a woman. You may go through your whole life and never read something that is written by a woman. I never even considered it until about maybe like 10, 15 years ago. And I realized that majority of the information that we take in as women come from men, and our voice is not heard. And there's not a lot of authors out there that are propped up that we get to. And so I made it, my mission that at least half of the books I read within a year are by women authors. It kind of changes your perspective. Throughout history, we don't have a lot of written information from the perspective of women. And so I say it's important for everybody to, listen to the voices that are out there, and find a way where you can self-develop within your own self, so that you can also put your experience and your voice out there, because we're going to need pathways to be able to, change society, to reinvent society, to reform it into something that serves everyone. Basically, to create society into a win-win for everyone involved. So I hope that helps. I hope you like my discussion of this book. It was fun to kind of talk about it. I can't believe I talked for 45 minutes, but it really was a good book and it had a lot of good topics in it. So I hope that helps. Have a great day, work life warriors.